It was supposed to be the worst day of my life. The day I sat by my husband David's side in the ICU, his body broken from a suspicious accident that didn't add up. But just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I received a message that shattered everything. I'm alive. That's not me in the ICU. As David fought for his life, I realized the real nightmare was only just beginning. My children, the ones I trusted most, were hiding a dark secret. Now I had to find the truth no matter where it led. Let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to hear how far this story has traveled. And don't forget to subscribe for more impactful stories. My name is Lily Monroe and I'm 66 years old. What I'm about to tell you will change everything you think you know about family. The first time I felt my world crumble, I was sitting in a hospital room watching my husband David fight for his life in the ICU. A car accident had left him unconscious, and the doctors weren't sure if he would ever wake up. It was late in the evening and I hadn't left his side for hours. The hospital room felt cold, sterile, with the incessant beep of machines monitoring his heart rate and blood pressure. David's once strong, tan face was pale, his chest rising and falling with the help of a ventilator. His dark hair, usually perfectly groomed, was matted to his forehead with sweat, and the machines beeped as if they were trying to hold on to what little life remained in him. I sat in the chair next to his bed, holding his hand, my thumb tracing over the lines in his palm. "Come back to me, David," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I'm here. I need you to wake up. I can't do this without you." We had been through so much together, 42 years of marriage, of laughter, of struggle. Now here I was, sitting beside him in a hospital room, holding on to hope as the world around us seemed to collapse. I had no idea what had happened that night. The police report said it was an accident, a crash on a rain-slicked road, but something about it didn't sit right with me. David was always so careful. He was meticulous. A man of routine, a man who took pride in his work as an engineer, and a man who would never make such a careless mistake. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this than just an accident. The thought of losing him was unbearable. He was everything to me. The love of my life, the father of my children. We had built a life together in Ashford, a small town in the middle of nowhere, but it had always felt like home. It was supposed to be our time now, to relax and enjoy the years ahead, but instead I found myself staring at the love of my life, not knowing if he would ever open his eyes again. The phone buzzed in my lap, jolting me from my thoughts. I didn't want to pick it up. I didn't want anything to disturb the fragile silence between me and David. But it kept buzzing, persistent, urgent. Finally, I picked it up, not recognizing the number that flashed on the screen. I stared at it for a moment, then swiped to open the message. "I'm still alive. That's not me in the bed." I froze. I had to read it twice before it even made sense. It felt like a punch to my gut. My hands began to tremble and I felt a cold sweat on the back of my neck. I glanced at David, still unconscious, his chest rising and falling in rhythm with the machine. Was someone playing a cruel joke on me? I typed back, my fingers shaking as I typed. "Who are you?" The reply came almost instantly. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust Ethan or Sophia." I stared at the message, my heart hammering in my chest. Ethan and Sophia. My children. My flesh and blood. I read the message again, this time feeling the weight of it sink in. Why would someone warn me about my own kids? It didn't make sense. I glanced at David again, the silent machine keeping track of his failing heart rate as my mind raced. Ethan and Sophia had been distant for months. My once loving children had become strangers, absorbed in their own lives, their own successes. Ethan, the oldest, had gone off to New York City to climb the corporate ladder. Sophia had made a name for herself in real estate. They were busy, always busy. I tried to convince myself it was normal, that they were just living their lives, but deep down something felt wrong. They seemed more focused on their careers, on their money, than on their family. I wanted to ignore the thought, but it lingered in the back of my mind. Could they be involved in this somehow? I shook my head. No, it couldn't be true. But the message had unsettled me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I stared at my phone, trying to make sense of the cryptic warning, when I received another message, this time a bit more urgent. "They want him gone, Lily. Don't let them deceive you." My heart stopped. I read it again, my stomach tightening. This couldn't be real, could it? Was someone playing with my mind, or was there a terrible truth lurking beneath the surface? David was always the cautious one, always so careful with everything he did. The thought that someone might want him gone, especially our own children, was impossible to comprehend. I couldn't breathe. I was suffocating in the weight of the uncertainty. My hands were clammy, my thoughts racing. Who would do something like this? And then it hit me. The accident. I had pushed aside my suspicions, clinging to the idea that it was just a tragic, unavoidable event. But what if it wasn't? What if David's accident wasn't an accident at all? What if someone had set it up? What if someone had intended for this to happen? Tears welled up in my eyes and I quickly wiped them away. I couldn't afford to fall apart now. Not when David needed me. But the fear was taking hold of me. The possibility of betrayal, of something far darker than I could have imagined, was creeping into my thoughts. I needed to find out the truth. I had to. For David. For myself. For our family. But where could I start? How could I even begin to figure out what was really going on? I looked down at David's lifeless face again, my heart aching. I don't know who sent me those messages. I didn't know if they were a prank or if they were something darker. But one thing was clear. I couldn't trust anyone, not even my own children. As I sat there staring at the messages on my phone, a voice inside me whispered, "Something is wrong. And I have to find out what it is before it's too late." I couldn't sit still any longer. My hands were shaking, my thoughts spinning uncontrollably. I couldn't believe what I was reading, couldn't believe the words I'd received from the unknown number. Ethan and Sophia? My children? Oh, it had to be a mistake. There was no way they would ever hurt David. But the message felt too real to ignore. It gnawed at me like a whisper I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. I stared at David, still unconscious, his body barely holding on to life. His breathing was shallow, the machines beside him the only thing keeping him tethered to this world. I reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "I'm not leaving you, David," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if he could hear me. "I won't stop until I know the truth. I swear it." But where was I supposed to start? How could I possibly unravel this web of lies when the people I trusted most, my own children, might be involved? My mind kept coming back to one undeniable fact. Something was terribly wrong. I didn't have answers. But I did have questions, and I would find the answers, no matter how painful they might be. The following morning, I sat at the small desk in the corner of David's hospital room. The silence of the room felt oppressive as I opened my laptop, trying to make sense of everything. I needed to know more about what had happened that night, about the accident. I needed to see the police report, the hospital records. I had to dig deeper. I couldn't trust the version of events I had been told. Not anymore. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I tried to focus. The details from the police report were vague. Just a few lines about a crash on a rainy night, David's car spinning out of control and slamming into a tree. They had written it off as a tragic accident. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. The way Ethan had reacted when I asked about the accident, it wasn't normal. He'd been too calm, almost dismissive. Was he hiding something? I started searching for the accident report online, reading through every detail. Nothing stood out at first, but the longer I searched, the more the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. David had been alone in the car when it happened, but why hadn't anyone mentioned the other vehicle that had reportedly been in the area? Why was that detail left out of the police report? I took a deep breath, feeling a cold chill run through me. This wasn't adding up. I needed to talk to the police. I needed to speak to someone who could tell me the truth. The phone call to the police department wasn't as easy as I had hoped. I tried to explain my concerns, how the report didn't feel right to me, how I thought there might have been more to the story. But the officer on the other end of the line, a man named Officer Holt, sounded like he had better things to do. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but the report was filed and it looks pretty standard. We've already done our part. If you'd like to press further, you'd have to speak to the investigating officer." He was dismissive, as if my suspicions didn't matter. But I wasn't going to let it go. I pressed him further. "I need to know if there's any other information. Is there any mention of another car? Was there any sign of foul play?" "Look, ma'am," Holt said, his tone more impatient now. "If you think there's something suspicious about your husband's accident, you need to hire a lawyer or private investigator. That's the only way you're going to get the answers you're looking for." I hung up, frustrated but resolute. Holt wasn't going to help me. He had written this off as a simple accident. But I knew there was something more. I didn't know where to turn next, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone who would listen to me, someone who wasn't just going to brush me off. David had trusted me to take care of everything, and I was going to do just that. I couldn't let his death, or worse, his possible betrayal, go unanswered. That's when I remembered James Calloway. I hadn't thought about him in years. He was a private investigator who had helped David a few times when we'd suspected some shady dealings in the past, but it had been a long while since we'd needed his services. I dug through David's desk drawer, pulling out the old business cards and files David had kept in the bottom drawer of his desk. James Calloway Investigations. His contact information was on the back of the card. I dialed the number, praying he would be available. After a few rings, his voice came through the phone, low and steady. Calloway. James, I said, feeling a sudden rush of relief. It's Lily Monroe. I need your help. It didn't take long for James to arrive at the hospital. He was a tall, wiry man in his mid-50s, with sharp eyes that never seemed to miss a detail. He'd always had a knack for noticing things that most people would overlook. He wasn't someone who just followed leads. He found them even when they were buried deep. I'm so sorry to hear about David, James said, his voice soft but direct. I understand this is a difficult time, but if you're asking for my help, I need to know what you think is going on. What exactly do you suspect? I glanced over at David's still form, my heart aching in my chest. I don't know yet, but something doesn't feel right. The police report about the accident. It doesn't make sense. And then there's this message I received. I pulled out my phone and showed him the text message from the unknown number. James read it, his eyes narrowing slightly as he processed the words. You think your kids might be involved? He asked, his tone carefully neutral. I don't know, I whispered, my voice trembling. I don't want to believe it. But Ethan and Sophia have changed, James. They're different. They're distant. And now I'm scared. What if they were involved in this? What if they did something to David? James looked up from the phone, meeting my eyes with a level of seriousness I hadn't seen before. Lily, if what you're saying is true, then this is more than just a family issue. You're talking about a crime. And I can help you get to the truth. But you have to be ready for whatever we uncover. I nodded, my heart heavy with the burden of what might come next. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when I had already lost so much. James began his investigation that day, starting with the police report and any information he could gather about the crash. I spent the next few days at David's side, keeping watch over him and trying to stay strong, but the weight of the unknown pressed down on me harder with each passing hour. As James worked, I couldn't help but feel like I was walking a tightrope. Every time I looked at Ethan or Sophia, I saw something different, something cold. I had raised them to value family, to cherish the bonds that tied us together. But now I wondered if those bonds had already snapped. And the more I thought about it, the more I began to question everything I had believed about my children. It's strange how quickly the familiar can turn foreign. The smell of antiseptic, the sterile feel of the hospital room, the soft whirring of machines. These were all things I had grown accustomed to in the past few days. But now, every little detail felt like a cruel reminder that everything was changing. David's condition hadn't improved. Each time I looked at him, I wanted to believe that somehow he would wake up. But as the hours ticked on, I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. The man I had spent 42 years with was slipping away, and no one seemed to have any answers. I tried to keep my focus, tried to keep the worry from taking over, but every time I looked at my children, Ethan and Sophia, I felt like something was missing. The warmth, the love that had once radiated from them. Was it just me or was it gone? Sophia had called once, 2 days after the accident. She'd sounded calm, almost too calm, and her words had a strange, rehearsed quality to them. Mom, I'm so sorry about Dad. If you need anything, you know we're here. Just, let me know. It wasn't the words that unsettled me, it was the tone. She hadn't asked how I was holding up. She hadn't even mentioned coming to the hospital. And when I asked her if she was planning on coming, her response was lukewarm, almost dismissive. I'll try to stop by soon, but work is crazy right now. Work was always crazy, it seemed. But wasn't family supposed to come first? I swallowed the lump in my throat and tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just stressed. Maybe she had her reasons. But when Ethan called, everything changed. It had been a few days since I last heard from him. I'd left him a voicemail asking if he was going to come visit his father. It took him 2 tries to answer. Mom, I'm on a business trip in Chicago, Ethan said, his voice tight like he was holding something back. I'll be home soon. Just keep me updated. Is Dad doing any better? The question hit me like a punch in the stomach. Is Dad doing any better? As if David's life could be reduced to some clinical question. As if the love we had built together didn't matter at all. I had learned long ago that Ethan was a master at compartmentalizing his emotions. The business world had made him this way, detached, cold even when it suited him. But hearing him ask so flatly about David's condition, about his father's life, felt like a slap. Something was wrong. I could feel it deep in my gut. But I had to keep my composure. I couldn't let myself fall apart, not yet. The next morning, James Calloway, the private investigator, came by the hospital. It was the first time in days that I felt like I had a small shred of hope. James, I said quietly as he entered, his tall frame casting a shadow across the room. Have you found anything? Anything that makes sense? James didn't beat around the bush. He sat down in the chair across from me, his eyes serious, his voice calm but direct. I've been digging through the accident report and the police records. A few things are off. For one, David's car wasn't the only one involved in the crash. There's a mention of a black SUV, but it wasn't mentioned in the official report. No one bothered to follow up on it. I sat up straighter, my heart racing. Second car? Who was driving the SUV? Did they find out? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I haven't tracked that down yet, but I'll keep pushing. But Lily, James paused, leaning forward, his eyes locking with mine. There's something else. You need to look into your children. Ethan and Sophia. They were more involved in this accident than you think. I froze. My children? Are you saying are they behind this? I barely managed to speak the words, my throat tightening with the weight of the accusation. I'm not saying anything yet, James replied, his voice low. But there's something going on. I found several bank transfers tied to their names, large amounts of money moving between accounts. And one of the transactions is tied to a company David had business with. It looks like they've been laundering money, and I can't help but think they're trying to cover it up. Laundering money? I repeated, stunned. Why would David's name be connected to this? That's the question, isn't it? James said. It's possible they've been using David as a front for their dealings. Or maybe he got caught in the middle of something they didn't want anyone to know about. I need to look deeper, but I'm starting to suspect they might have been involved in this accident more directly than we think. The room felt colder, the weight of his words pressing on me. My children. My children. Could they really be involved in something so dark? The thought was unbearable. I have to know, James. Please dig deeper. I need to understand what happened to David. I need to know if Ethan and Sophia are capable of this. I'll keep working on it. But Lily, you need to prepare yourself. The truth might be more horrifying than you realize. The next few days passed in a blur. I couldn't focus, couldn't sleep. I spent my time sitting by David's side, watching him drift in and out of consciousness. The doctors told me that he was improving slightly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Ethan and Sophia's visits were few and far between. When they did show up, it was awkward. They seemed more interested in the financials, who would take over the house, who would get what, than in David's health. They spoke in hushed tones as though they didn't want me to hear, but I could feel their coldness seeping through. I asked them once directly what had happened the night of the accident. They both gave vague answers. Ethan's eyes avoided mine, and Sophia looked at her phone, clearly uninterested in engaging in a real conversation. That night, after a particularly tense interaction with them, I went back to my room and looked at the message again, the one I'd received about the accident. Don't trust Ethan or Sophia. I couldn't shake it. James had told me to keep looking, to not trust anyone. I wasn't sure who to trust anymore. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't let this go. Not when David was fighting for his life. Not when I had already lost so much. I had to find out the truth. And whatever it took, I would make sure David's death, or whatever this was, wouldn't go unanswered. It's funny, isn't it? How the world can turn upside down in a heartbeat, how everything you thought was solid, stable, can shatter like glass. I used to believe that love and family were the foundation of everything. That no matter how much time passed or how far my children and I drifted apart, we'd always be connected by that invisible thread. But now, as I sat beside David, his life hanging by a thread, I realized just how fragile everything really was. David hadn't improved. His condition remained critical, and the doctors weren't offering any new hope. They kept saying the same thing: "We're doing everything we can." But their voices were filled with the kind of hollow reassurance that only made my fear deeper. And all the while I couldn't stop thinking about what James had uncovered. Ethan and Sophia. Their names echoed in my mind like a mantra, a persistent thud that wouldn't go away. I wanted to believe they couldn't be involved, wanted to believe that it was just a misunderstanding, that the money and the shady transactions James had found were just coincidences. But deep down I knew better. I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. The way they'd avoided coming to the hospital. The way they'd brushed off their father's condition like it was just another inconvenience in their busy lives. And now, with James's findings pointing directly to them, I couldn't help but feel like a fool for not seeing the signs earlier. It wasn't just the financials or the coldness in their behavior. It was the subtle things too. The way Ethan had been quick to suggest moving David to a hospice, almost like he had already written him off. The way Sophia had tried to pressure me into signing paperwork for a new financial arrangement, as if I would be too overwhelmed to notice the details. And then there were the messages, the mysterious warnings I had received. Don't trust Ethan or Sophia. They're planning something. Were they warnings from someone who knew the truth, or just the paranoid ramblings of someone who was losing their grip on reality? Either way, it didn't matter anymore. I had to find out what had really happened. That night, after another long day of sitting in the hospital room, I couldn't sleep. The thought of my children plotting against David, against me, kept me awake. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. How could they do this? How could they betray us like this? We had given them everything. Everything. The life David and I built together, the sacrifices we made for them. How could they throw it all away for money? My phone buzzed at 2 o'clock in the morning. I sat up quickly, my heart racing. It was an unknown number just like the others. "They're closing in, Lily. You're running out of time." The message was short, cryptic, and chilling. But at this point it didn't scare me. If anything, it made my resolve even stronger. I had to act fast. The next morning I met with James again. He had been working tirelessly, digging through David's financial records and trying to track down the connections between Ethan, Sophia, and the mysterious transactions. But what he told me next hit me harder than anything I had anticipated. "Lily," James said, sitting across from me, his face grim. "I found something. I went through David's old files and I found a recent update to his will." I blinked, stunned. "A will?" But David didn't mention anything about a new will. James nodded. "I know. That's because David didn't want anyone to know. He made sure I was the only one who knew about it. It was signed just 6 months ago, right before the accident." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. "What does it say?" James hesitated for a moment, then handed me a piece of paper. I unfolded it carefully, my heart pounding as I read David's final wishes. "Last will and testament of David Monroe. I, David Monroe, being of sound mind and body, declare this to be my last will and testament. To my beloved wife, Lily Monroe, I leave everything I have, our home, our savings, and all of our assets. You are to have full control over everything, as I trust you will always act in the best interests of our family. To my children, Ethan Monroe and Sophia Monroe, I leave a nominal amount, enough to ensure that they will not be left wanting. However, due to their recent actions and growing disconnect from the values that I hold dear, I have decided to exclude them from the inheritance of my remaining assets. The estate is to be managed by Lily alone. If anything happens to me under suspicious circumstances, I have arranged for a private investigator, James Calloway, to be contacted immediately to investigate the situation and ensure that justice is served." I felt my breath catch in my throat as I finished reading. David had known. He had known something was going wrong, something was shifting in his children's hearts. And he had acted accordingly, even when he didn't know what the full picture would look like. "James, do you think they knew about this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't think so," James replied. "At least not until now. But the way things are unfolding, I wouldn't be surprised if they figured it out soon." I folded the will carefully, my hands trembling. The weight of it settled in my chest like a stone. David had protected me. He had known his children would change, and he had taken steps to ensure that, if anything ever happened to him, I wouldn't be left alone to deal with the fallout. But it was clear, David hadn't just suspected betrayal. He had anticipated it. I didn't have time to dwell on that revelation. James had uncovered something else in his investigation. A video. Lily, I found a recording. It's from a security camera outside of David's shop. It was taken just days before the accident. I watched the footage, my heart sinking as I saw David standing outside his shop talking to Ethan. The conversation was too quiet for me to hear at first, but James adjusted the volume. It's just insurance, Dad. We need more coverage, you know that, Ethan said, his voice smooth and practiced. I've already got the coverage I need, David replied, his voice steady but with a hint of concern. I don't need any more. You're pushing me into something I'm not comfortable with. Ethan's reply was calm, but there was something cold in his eyes, something calculated. Look, we're just thinking about your future, about what's best for the family. Trust me, Dad. It's the right move. David shook his head, clearly uncomfortable. I don't trust this. I don't trust you. The video cut off after that, but I didn't need to see any more. The conversation was enough. Ethan had been pressuring David to update his life insurance policy to get more coverage, more money. It all started to make sense. The accident, the coldness, the push for more financial security. I had no illusions left. Ethan and Sophia were involved. They had orchestrated this. I didn't know if they had gone as far as to physically harm David, but they had certainly manipulated him. And now they were trying to take everything from me. I couldn't let this go. Not now. Not after everything David had sacrificed for them. That evening I walked into David's room, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what was unfolding. I sat beside him, holding his hand, whispering softly. I'm not going to let them get away with this, David. I promise you. I'll find the truth and I'll make them pay. I couldn't remember the last time I had slept. Every time I closed my eyes, the images of Ethan and Sophia, cold and detached, flashed before me. Their voices, their dismissive attitudes, their lack of concern for their father's condition, it all circled around in my mind, a relentless storm. It had been days since I uncovered the truth about David's will and the unsettling video of Ethan pressuring him about his life insurance. The weight of it all hung heavy in my chest. My world, once filled with the warmth of family, had collapsed into something unrecognizable, something far darker. The people I had loved most, my children, were not the ones I thought they were. I had to confront them. I had to stand up for David's legacy and for the family we had built together, even if it meant losing everything. It was late afternoon when I called them both. I didn't want to wait any longer. The more I thought about it, the more I knew this had to happen now. They had to know that I knew the truth, that I wouldn't be manipulated or silenced. They had taken too much from us already. The phone rang twice before Ethan picked up. Mom. His voice sounded strained, like he was distracted by something else. The casual tone he tried to maintain only made my blood boil. What's going on? How's Dad? Ethan, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the sharpness in my words. We need to talk. Both you and Sophia. Now. There was a brief pause. What's this about? He asked, his voice suddenly guarded. Just get her here. Both of you. I'm at the house. I ended the call before he could say anything else, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I was ready. I had no other choice. An hour later, both Ethan and Sophia arrived at the house. They walked in together, their usual air of superiority in place. Ethan was dressed in his usual sharp suit, and Sophia wore an elegant dress that seemed out of place in this quiet, empty home. They both glanced at me briefly before sitting down in the living room, the tension palpable. What's this all about, Mom? Sophia asked, crossing her arms, her eyes darting around the room as though she were already mentally preparing to leave. I stood in front of them, my hands trembling with both anger and determination. I didn't sit. I didn't want them to think I was giving them any more room to control the situation. You've both been playing me, haven't you? I said, my voice cold, cutting through the silence. Ethan's eyes flicked nervously to Sophia. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. I know everything. I know about the insurance, about the way you've been pushing David to sign papers, about the money transfers. I know about the video. Sophia's face turned pale and Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. For a brief moment, their confident exteriors cracked, revealing the panic underneath. They hadn't expected me to confront them like this. What the hell are you talking about? Ethan finally spat, his voice rising, trying to mask the fear that was creeping into it. I'm talking about your betrayal, Ethan. And yours too, Sophia. I turned to face them both now, my eyes hardening. You've been plotting behind our backs, using David's name for your own gain. You've been manipulating him, lying to him just like I suspected. You knew he wouldn't make it and you couldn't wait for him to die so you could inherit everything. The words hit them like a slap. Ethan's mouth opened but no words came out. Sophia's face flushed with anger, but it was the kind of anger that came from being caught, not from genuine outrage. This is crazy, Sophia said, shaking her head, her voice trembling with fury. You don't know what you're talking about, Mom. We were just trying to help Dad. He was getting old and… Help him. I interrupted, my voice rising. You wanted him gone. That's the only thing you've been trying to do. Help yourselves, not him. Sophia's face twisted with a mix of disbelief and contempt. You're being ridiculous. He was fine, just a little confused. We were worried about him. We wanted to make sure he was safe. And now you're accusing us of what? Of trying to kill him. I felt my hands ball into fist. You were worried about him? Then why didn't you come here to the hospital when you found out? Why did you barely call? Why did you act like you couldn't care less? Sophia opened her mouth to reply, but the words caught in her throat. Ethan suddenly leaned forward, his voice low and deadly. This is insane. You're just upset, Mom. You're grieving. You're not thinking straight. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about, I shot back. And you two know it. You've been talking to each other behind my back, making plans. It's all here in the records. In the video. I turned to James, who had been standing by the door, quietly observing. He pulled out his phone and pressed a button. The video of Ethan and David's conversation played on the screen. The room went still as Ethan's voice filled the air, speaking to David in that condescending tone. Just trust me, Dad. We need to do this. It's for the future. Sophia's eyes widened in shock as she saw it, and Ethan looked as though he wanted to sink into the floor. That was private. Ethan snapped, rising to his feet, but his bravado faltered. That doesn't prove anything. You didn't trust me, so what? I was trying to help. You were trying to help yourself. I yelled, stepping forward, my chest heaving with a mix of anger and heartbreak. This isn't about helping him, Ethan. You wanted control. You wanted to take everything from us. Ethan looked like he was about to say something else, but he stopped. His eyes flicked towards Sophia, and for a second I saw the truth in his eyes. They had been in this together. And now, with the video and the truth laid bare, they had nowhere to hide. I did it for us, Mom, Ethan finally muttered, his voice shaking with a mix of guilt and frustration. We needed the money. Things had been tough. We had debts and we needed something to fall back on. Sophia remained silent, her face a mask of cold indifference, but her eyes betrayed her. The anger she tried to hide only made her look more desperate, more cornered. I don't care about your debts, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. What you did to David, what you did to me, is unforgivable. James stepped forward, his voice firm. We have enough evidence to take this to the authorities, Ethan. And if Lily wants to, she can press charges. Ethan seemed to deflate, his shoulders slumping. He looked at me, his expression somewhere between defiance and regret. Mom, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry, but I couldn't help it. It felt like the only way out. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. The only way out was through love, Ethan. Not through greed. You lost your way long before David even got hurt. And now you've lost me too. Sophia stood up, shaking her head as though she couldn't bear to hear any more. You're making a mistake, she said, her voice cold. We didn't do anything wrong. You'll regret this. No, Sophia, I said softly. You will. Ethan and Sophia stood there, trapped in their lies, their arrogance crumbling in the face of the truth. I had made my decision. I wasn't backing down. The truth would come to light, and David's memory would not be tarnished by their greed. The phone call I made that night to the police would start the final chain of events that would lead to their arrest. They had underestimated me. And now I was going to make sure they paid for what they had done. The following weeks were a blur. The house that once felt like a home, a place where David and I had spent a lifetime building our lives together, now felt empty, hollow. Each room echoed with memories of laughter, of love, of family gatherings. But now all of that seemed like a distant dream, a dream I wasn't sure I would ever wake up from. The confrontation with Ethan and Sophia had been the tipping point. After I showed them the video and confronted them with the evidence, there was no going back. I had made my decision. I would press charges. I would let the truth be known, even if it meant losing everything that had once been dear to me. The police came the next day. The look on Ethan's face when they arrived at his door was something I would never forget. It was a mixture of disbelief and fear, the realization that all his lies and manipulation had caught up with him. Sophia, on the other hand, never showed any sign of regret. She was cold, calculating, determined to defend her actions, even as the walls closed in around her. But it wasn't just about the betrayal. It wasn't just about what they had done to David. It was about what they had done to me, the trust one had placed in them, the love I had given them unconditionally. When the police arrested them, the weight of it all hit me. I felt no joy, no relief. Just an overwhelming sadness. The children I had raised, the children I had given everything for, had turned against me. And I had no choice but to let them face the consequences of their actions. The trial was set for a few months later. Every day I found myself going over the evidence in my mind. The video. The will. The financial transactions. I had done everything in my power to prepare for the fight ahead. But every time I stood in front of a mirror, I saw a woman I didn't recognize. The woman who once believed in the goodness of her children was gone. In her place was someone hardened by betrayal, by loss, by the cold realization that everything she had known was a lie. David's absence left a void in me that nothing could fill. James Calloway, the private investigator, remained by my side through it all. His steady presence was a comfort. His professionalism, his unwavering belief in justice, all of it helped me keep moving forward. He became more than just an investigator. He became a friend, a reminder that I wasn't truly alone, even if it sometimes felt like I was. The day of the trial arrived. I stood outside the courtroom trying to steady my nerves. The entire town of Ashford seemed to be there, waiting to see how the story would unfold. The people who once saw me as a mother, a wife, now saw me as a figure of tragedy, of strength, but also of sadness. I wasn't sure how I felt about their pity, but I had bigger things to focus on. As I walked into the courtroom, I could hear whispers. Everyone knew. Everyone had heard the story. The case of the killer children had taken over the town, and it had made headlines across the state. My heart pounded as I took my seat at the front. I knew what I had to do. Ethan and Sophia entered in handcuffs, their faces expressionless. Ethan avoided my gaze entirely, while Sophia's eyes met mine only briefly, before she quickly looked away. There was no apology, no remorse. Only a sense of entitlement. I had been dreading this moment for weeks, but now as I watched them sit across from me, I realized something. I wasn't just fighting for David's memory anymore. I wasn't just fighting for justice. I was fighting for my own peace. The prosecutor, a man named Darren Miller, began his opening statement. He was well-spoken, precise. He outlined the case against Ethan and Sophia, detailing their financial manipulations, the insurance fraud, the conspiracy to murder David for the payout. When the video of David's conversation with Ethan was shown, the courtroom fell into a stunned silence. I glanced at Ethan and Sophia. The guilt was undeniable, even if they refused to acknowledge it. Their eyes darted nervously as the video played, but neither of them spoke up. It wasn't until I took the stand that the true weight of everything I had gone through hit me. I stood there in front of the judge, in front of everyone, and I told the truth. The whole truth. I never imagined my children could betray me, I began, my voice shaking but firm. I never imagined they could betray their father. But I have to face the fact that they did. They used us, manipulated us, and they didn't stop until they thought they could take everything we had. They thought they could take David's life. And they almost did. I paused, taking a deep breath as my mind flashed to the years I had spent raising them, to the moments I had shared with them. I loved them both, I continued, my voice breaking slightly. I sacrificed everything for them. But they let greed and ambition blind them to the love we shared. They chose money over family. Tears welled up in my eyes as I spoke, but I didn't look away. I couldn't. David is gone and I can't bring him back. But I can make sure they don't get away with this. I can make sure they pay for what they did. The trial lasted for weeks, but the evidence against Ethan and Sophia was overwhelming. The financial records, the video, the testimony, it all came together in a damning case. The jury deliberated for hours, and when they returned with their verdict, the courtroom was filled with tense anticipation. We find the defendants, Ethan Monroe and Sophia Monroe, guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The words hit me like a wave. The world felt still for a moment. I had expected it, but hearing it aloud made it real in a way I hadn't fully prepared for. The two people I had loved the most, the people I had raised, were going to prison for the rest of their lives. I didn't cry. I didn't feel joy. I just felt empty. The sentencing came shortly after. Ethan and Sophia were each given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Their lives, everything they had built, was now destroyed. And for what? For greed? For a few extra dollars? I couldn't understand it. I never would. The weeks after the trial were quiet. Too quiet. I stayed in the house for a while, finding solace in the familiar surroundings. The house didn't feel like home anymore, not without David, but it was all I had left. One evening, James came over to check on me. We sat together on the porch, drinking coffee just like David and I used to do. "Lily," James said after a long silence, "how are you holding up?" I sighed, my eyes looking out over the garden that David had tended to with such care. "I'm okay. I think I'm finally at peace." He nodded, understanding more than words could say. "You know," I said softly, "it's strange. I've spent so much time grieving for David, for what was taken from us. But in a way, I think I've also been grieving the children I thought I had. The children I raised. They died a long time ago and I just didn't see it." James put his hand on mine, his voice gentle. "You can't blame yourself for that." "I know," I said, a small smile pulling at my lips. "But I will miss them. The people they were." The years passed slowly. I kept busy with the foundation I had started in David's name, helping victims of family crimes, the same way I had once been helped. The memories of the trial faded and the town slowly moved on. But for me, that empty house still held the echo of David's laugh, of the love we once shared. And every Sunday I still went to the cemetery. I still brought fresh flowers to David's grave, where I talked to him about everything that had happened. I told him about the foundation, about the lives we were helping. I told him about the peace I had finally found. "David, wherever you are, I hope you know that I kept my promise. I fought for the truth. I fought for you and I fought for our family. I found justice even when it meant losing everything. But you know what? I'm okay now. I'm stronger than I ever thought I could be. And I'll always carry you with me in my heart, in my soul. Always." Thank you for listening to this powerful story of betrayal and justice. If it resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, no matter what you face, truth and love always have the power to prevail. If you've experienced something similar, don't be afraid to seek help and stand up for what's right. Subscribe for more stories that inspire strength and resilience. Share your thoughts in the comments. How did this story impact you? Stay strong, stay true.